What was the scariest we need to leave now gut feeling that you've ever experienced? Story 1. Surfing a fairly secluded reef break, offshore across a channel. This place is in a very southern state of Australia. Overcast weather, but still an amazing day for waves. I was surfing with only one other guy. We were trading waves and getting to know each other in between sets. I asked what he did for a living, and he said he was a marine biologist. We'd both recently moved to the area and were new to surfing it as well. Despite it being extremely good surf, after 40 minutes he said, "I don't like this. Something feels off. I feel like I'm being watched. Like I'm bait." I didn't want to leave, as it was excellent surf. But this guy was a marine biologist, so I took his instinct as a sign to play it safe. We paddled back across the deep channel together as quickly as we could, without panicking, and walked the 15-minute trek back to the car park, talking casually the whole way. I got his mobile number for future surfs together, given how small town it is here and not knowing anyone. We noticed a 15-foot inflatable boat pull up near the reef and hang around for a bit, but didn't think much of it. Later that night, while looking at my social media, I read about 3 fishermen who had been at the same location we were that morning, at the same time. As they pulled up to check their cray pots on the beach side of the reef, they were circled twice by a great white shark that was as big as their boat. That guy most likely saved me from a terrifying experience that day. I messaged him with a link to the Facebook page with the comments about what had happened. I had chills running through my body for a good 20 minutes. He was adamant that he felt the presence of something, and he was right. Story 2. Viewing a flat that didn't exist. Not my story, but one my mom told me from her 20s when she was living and working in London, UK. I'll do my best to retell it. Also, I'm dyslexic, so apologies in advance for grammar. This story always gives me the creeps when I think about it. So back in her 20s, my mom was living in London and looking to move into a slightly bigger place. She'd found a really good price for a flat slightly outside the area she was hoping for. She called the agent to book a viewing, and that's when things turned odd. The person booking the viewing started asking strange requests and questions, such as to bring her passport, her age, race, and physical appearance. He asked whether she would be coming alone, and if she had a car or would be taking the bus. He was very persistent that she should arrive by bus, explaining that it was a straight road down from the bus stop to the apartment block. Obviously quite unnerved by this call, but still interested, because the flat looked ideal, she and my dad, who were dating at the time, decided to check the exterior and surrounding area. The day before the viewing, they drove there, first passing the bus stop he had told her to arrive via. From the bus stop, there was about 150 to 200 meters of derelict wasteland that she would have to walk past to get to the flat. And standing at the end of the street, where this apartment block was supposed to be, was a huge abandoned building. Smashed, broken windows, graffiti, no entry signs, the works. Definitely nothing inhabitable in sight. Still, when she tells this story today, you can see how much it, rightfully, shook her. Of course, she didn't go to the viewing, but she did inform the police, advising them of the planned time and place. From what she saw and from following up with them, they didn't seem to take this tip seriously, and little was done. A couple of years later, while in a pub with some friends, she got chatting with a guy she had just met through mutual friends that night. He was in the police, and through conversation, her story came up. He said that the area at the time of her viewing had a major human trafficking issue. Still gives me chills. Story 3. When I was about 8, in 1985, an old El Camino pulled up alongside my friend and me with a man saying he knew my mom. He did know her name, but something felt off, so I grabbed my friend and ran. When we told my mom, she went pale and called the police. Turns out this guy thought my mom had taken his job at the steel mill she worked at during that time and wanted to hurt her. He already had a warrant out for nearly hurting his wife that same morning. When I was 16, my mom had a terrible feeling about an outing some friends and I were planning. In hindsight, it was a bad idea to go anyway, but I did. Long story short, there was a car accident. My 2 best friends passed away, and I nearly did too. It'll be 30 years this November, and I still regret getting in that car every day. My friends might still be alive if I hadn't. My mom had that mama instinct. She still does. More recently, I was at our other house in the countryside with my oldest son, his wife, and their kids. There was a break in the storms, and my son decided to go home instead of staying the night. I was filled with dread at the thought of them driving home so late, since we were dealing with intermittent but severe storms. I was so overwhelmed that I started crying and begging them not to leave. Thankfully, they agreed. We all started home the next morning, with them following me and my husband. We came upon a stretch of road that we knew had no lights at night, and saw police barricading a washed-out bridge and cranes retrieving cars. We all got out to ask the officers what had happened. Apparently, several cars had kept going, not realizing the bridge was out. The lone survivor in the first car had told police they went off the bridge around 9:30 p.m. That's about the time my son had wanted to leave. My husband just looked at me, and my son hugged me extra tight because he knew what could have happened. Story 4. After graduating undergrad, I was working as a caseworker for individuals with developmental disabilities and got assigned a new case involving a young man with autism and severe behavioral concerns. I met him at his grandmother's house, as she had custody of him since his parents weren't around. I believe his mother was in prison. The young man was probably about 6'0" and weighed around 250 pounds, but had the developmental capacity of a 5-year-old with a very quick temper. The house he was living in was completely trashed, and the only piece of furniture not destroyed was an oversized beanbag chair in the living room. His grandmother had given up trying to send him to school because he would completely destroy the place if forced to go. She wasn't exactly easy to deal with either, but I felt for her and wanted to help. During one of the meetings I had with them, the young man and his grandmother seemed especially tense. He was pacing around the room and hitting the walls. After about an hour of trying to make progress and realizing it just wasn't going to happen that day, which happens in this line of work, I decided to end the visit. The young man was becoming more and more agitated. His grandmother was annoyed that I'd have to come back again, but we scheduled for about a week out, and I left my business card with a reminder of the appointment. I left town to return to my home state for a few days. When I got back, I was called into my supervisor's office. Apparently, the night I left, the young man had a complete breakdown and harmed his grandmother fatally. No one noticed until he came wandering outside after a day or two, covered in blood. I probably missed it all by less than 3 hours. Story 5. My little sister and I went camping in the woods very close to our house when we were kids. We'd seen this bald man with a blue shirt and a dog walking around, which wasn't unusual for the area. People often walked there, and we'd usually say hello. But for some reason, I got this tight feeling in my chest, and my sister must have too, because we both gave each other a look. I don't know what made me do it. This was very out of character for me, but I took a photo of the back of him as he was walking away. A while later, we saw the same man again near the lake. He came over and asked about the tent we were carrying, where we'd be setting up, and if we were camping with our dad. We said yes, that we were just about to meet him. A lie. We must have had another moment of shared intuition because we walked up a fork in the path until we were out of view, then quickly jumped down a hidden path behind some bushes and waited quietly on a parallel trail. The man had watched us walk off, pretended to play with his dog until he could no longer see us, then turned around and ran up the trail after us. Thankfully, he didn't see us hidden in the bushes and continued up the path where he assumed we'd gone. We decided camping was a bad idea and went straight home. That evening, our mom showed us a post in the local residents group. It was a photo of the same bald man trying to break into someone's house. Apparently, he had been walking around trying front doors and claimed to be a repairman when confronted. I really don't want to imagine what his actual intentions were, but we were very lucky that my sister and I knew those woods well enough to find a hidden path to avoid him. Story 6. I was around 10 or 11 years old and had been invited to a sleepover. My mom didn't really like me going to those because I'd usually end up staying up way too late and then being cranky the whole next day. When she dropped me off, she gave me her usual reminder. Just remember, if you want to leave, I will come get you. It doesn't matter what time it is, just call me. The sleepover itself was the usual routine. We watched a movie, gossiped, prank called some boys, this being before cell phones and caller ID, broke out the Ouija board, etc. It turned out the girl hosting the sleepover had an older brother, high school age, who also had a few friends over. I remember them standing in the doorway of the rec room watching us, and something about them made my blood run cold. I just thought, I'm going to go home. I went upstairs and asked to use the phone, saying I wasn't feeling well and needed to leave. Her mom initially told me no, and even mocked me a bit for being a baby, but I kept insisting that I needed to call my mom. I still remember the strong feeling that I had to leave. Eventually, I was allowed to use the phone. My mom came to get me, and we stopped by Dairy Queen on the way home. My mom was always cool like that. I still remember the massive relief I felt when she pulled up and I got into the car. Years later, I found out that the brother and/or his friends had inappropriately touched some of the girls at the sleepover while they were asleep. No one reported it at the time, and it took years for the girls to compare stories and realize they weren't alone. I feel awful that happened to them, but I'm still glad I listened to my instincts and got out of there. Story 7. Back in 2019, my husband, our two girls aged 6 and 9, and I were on a road trip in the South. We had booked an apartment in Atlanta through Airbnb without knowing anything about the neighborhood. It turned out to be bad, really sketchy, with a lot of unsettling people hanging around. We went into the apartment, and immediately my 6-year-old said, "I don't like it here." The door didn't lock properly. The beds were dirty, there was rotting food in the fridge, and the bathroom looked like it hadn't been cleaned in ages. My husband called the owner, who was furious and refused to give us a refund. To de-escalate the situation, my husband offered not to leave a negative review if we could just get our money back. The owner agreed, but asked us to wait for him so they could talk about it in person. As soon as he hung up, I told my husband that we needed to leave now. We rushed to the car, and as we pulled out of the parking garage, we saw the owner driving up with 4 friends. He didn't see us, and we bolted out of there. We ended up at a hotel on the 14th floor. Didn't even feel safe at street level. Story 8. I was 12 at the time, and my favorite thing in the world was spending the night at my grandma's house. We lived in a remote area, and my grandma lived closer to the nearest town. Thursday night was grandma's night. I felt something off one Thursday and asked my mom if I could stay home instead with her and my dad. They reluctantly agreed. I went home, watched some TV, and went to bed. My bedroom was next to the living room. I wasn't really asleep when I heard my mom keep saying my dad's name over and over with a hint of panic. I peeked into the living room, and my dad was on the couch with his head tilted back, snoring loudly, which wasn't unusual. But my mom was beside him, shaking him and trying to wake him. She yelled at me to go back to bed. I didn't, obviously. I went to their bedroom to call 911. I told the dispatcher my dad was asleep and my mom couldn't wake him up. Eventually, the phone call went to the living room, and my mom talked to the dispatcher. They sent an ambulance to the middle of nowhere. My dad had taken a bottle of diazepam in an attempt to end his life. I remember sitting on the floor holding his hand and repeating over and over that I loved him. The ambulance came and took him to the hospital, lights and sirens all the way. We didn't know what had happened until a day or so later, and that's when our world changed. I'm very sure that if I hadn't called 911 that night, my dad wouldn't have made it. And it probably would have broken my mom too. And I still have no idea why I didn't want to go to my grandma's that night. I just had a feeling I needed to be home. Story 9. When I was in middle school, there were reports of a man driving around neighborhoods near our old elementary school trying to talk to girls and lure them into his car. We lived in one of those neighborhoods. One day after school, my friend and I were skateboarding when we saw a car matching the description following some younger girls we knew. We rode up to them and asked if everything was okay. The guy told us to go away, and the girls said he wouldn't leave them alone. We didn't take kindly to being told off, so we hopped off our boards and started hitting the side panels of his car. He screamed and sped off. We told our parents and a family friend, who was a detective at the time, what had happened and what we had done. Within 24 hours, the police had found his car because of the damage and arrested the guy. Story 10. I stopped by a friend's house to watch a ball game. He, his wife, and I were just relaxing when someone knocked on the door. It was the middle of the afternoon. He opened it, expecting others might come by. I heard him greeting someone. It was his brother, whom I had never met but had heard about. Very sketchy-looking guy. Rotted teeth, thin, long, greasy hair. My friend had told me he had a brother with a serious drug problem. They chatted about nothing in particular, and then the guy got a call on his cell. All he said to the caller was, "Not yet, I'll call you later." It seemed pretty clear that he had come to rob the place, and maybe worse. I looked at my friend, and it seemed like he had come to the same conclusion. Now my friend's wife is a no-nonsense woman, kind but athletic and tall. She had left the room to use the bathroom, or so she said. She came back in holding a handgun. I was thinking, what did I walk into? But calmly she said, Ron, you're strung out and came here with bad intentions. You need to leave quietly. And if you get any ideas, Chris is sitting outside in his truck to make sure you go. Ron didn't say a word. He just turned and walked out the door. We heard his old pickup drive away quickly. Chris came inside and said, he's gone. I don't think he's coming back. They asked me to leave so they could decide what to do. They had already called the police, who knew Ron well. The next morning, my buddy called me. The police had found Ron at the trailer park where he lived. He had been shot multiple times. They believed he had serious drug debts and had come to rob his brother. I told my friend I was sorry. He said, don't be. Story 11. When we were in our teens, my sister and I were walking our dog in our local forest area, very close to our childhood home. We were about to leave and had just clipped our dog back on the leash when a lady appeared out of nowhere and started chatting with us. She was odd. She told us her dog would love some socialization with our dog and asked if we could come back with her for 5 minutes. What I hadn't noticed, but my sister had, was that her dog was nowhere to be seen. The woman was almost herding us back toward the forest when, unbeknownst to me, my sister spotted a van out of the corner of her eye. I was still completely unaware at this point. Suddenly, my sister screamed, Dad! And to our luck, our dad had finished work and was now out on a run. He started waving and running toward us. When we turned back around, the lady had vanished. My sister looked back over at the van and saw the woman closing the passenger door before it sped off. Still no sign of a dog. I truly believe we were minutes away from something terrible. It felt like divine intervention that our dad happened to be at the right place at the right time. Story 12. A friend called me and said, there's a wildfire 8 miles away. Can you help me move my horses? So I drove down. She was wrong. It was 8 miles by road, but under 2 miles as the crow flies. We got the first set of horses out and down to another farm. I was working on the second group when suddenly everything got quiet. It was as if the world paused for a moment. I looked at the horse, and it looked ready to bolt. I took a deep breath, and suddenly the noise returned. The wind was scorching, and the light changed. I told Sherry, the girl I was helping, we gotta go now. No time to load the horses into the trailer. They're smart enough to survive, and I let them loose. We ran to the truck, and the barn was already on fire. Then we realized the fire had passed us and was now blocking the road. So we jumped out and ran to a small pond for the horses and dove in, hoping the fire wouldn't reach us. It was about 20 minutes of absolute chaos. It may have been longer. It felt endless, terrifying, blistering hot, and deafening. We were rescued by a water-dropping helicopter from the fire department. It landed in the field and pulled us in. We were extremely lucky. The truck was burned down to the frame. The horse Sherry let go sadly didn't make it. The one I let go survived but had burns. That's probably the scariest moment I've ever experienced. Story 13. My brother and I were kids playing hide and seek in the front yard of our house. My brother was 3 and I was 6. He was supposed to be counting and finding me, but he was taking forever, so I peeked around the side of the house to see what was taking so long. He had lost interest in the game and was standing near the front gate that led to the street. As I looked, a brown car pulled up with 2 men inside. I didn't recognize the car or the men. They both got out and started approaching my brother, asking him questions and moving closer. I remember feeling panicked. I had learned about stranger danger in school and knew something was very wrong. I ran around the side of the house, flew through the back door, and screamed, "Someone is trying to take Steve!" My dad didn't hesitate. He jumped up and ran through the front door. When the men saw my dad, they bolted and sped off. From that day on, we weren't allowed to play in the front yard anymore. It's one of the scariest memories I have from my childhood. Story 14. Does an "I need to go home now" feeling count? Because it wasn't me. It was my mom. I was around 12 and she left to run an errand, leaving me alone at home. Not long after she left, the doorbell rang. This was strange because we lived on a hill with only 2 neighbors, and we didn't get random visitors. Thanks to some conveniently placed picture frames, I could see outside without being seen. I looked and saw a young man I didn't recognize. He was wearing a t-shirt and jeans, and something about him just felt off. So I stayed quiet and waited for him to leave. But he didn't. He lingered and started smoking. Again, this was an isolated hill, I was alone, and now I was getting nervous. I went and hid, planning to wait for my mom to come home, except she had just left and had a few errands to run. I couldn't reach the phone without being seen. As I was trying to figure out what to do, my mom came home. She ran inside and asked if I was okay. Apparently, she got a sudden urge to come home. Immediately. She hadn't even started her errands, but turned around and came straight back. She found the man still in our yard and asked him what he needed. He mumbled something vague about looking for someone, and my mom told him to leave. She said he was acting really strangely and made her feel uneasy. To this day, I have no idea what he wanted, or how my mom knew to come home. But I'm very, very thankful she did. Story 15. When I was a little boy back in the early 70s, we lived on a small hobby farm in central New Jersey. One night there was a huge storm with thunder and lightning. We were gathered in the family room when there was the loudest crack I'd ever heard in my short life, accompanied by a blinding flash of light. The power didn't go out, but the light bulb in the floor lamp next to the chair where my father had been sitting moments before exploded into hundreds of tiny shards. There was the acrid smell of an electrical fire, but it wasn't coming from the lamp. I asked my father, "Is the house on fire?" "Yes," he bellowed back at me. I started running for the door, but he grabbed my arm and yelled, "Don't move!" I was terrified and, in my 5-year-old mind, thought I was about to perish with my parents in a fire we could easily have run out of. I became hysterical. My dad released his hold on me, but my mom grabbed me as I again tried to run for a door. "I said stay put!" my dad shouted. I started sobbing that we were all going to die and yelled something back at my dad that he was going to get us all hurt. He didn't take it well. What I didn't understand at the time, and not until many years later, was that the house was clad in aluminum siding. My dad was an electrical engineer and understood that if the house had sustained a direct lightning strike, it would have become a huge capacitor that would discharge tens of thousands of volts through any watery, ion-filled human that contacted both the house and the wet ground just outside the door. As it turned out, the hit wasn't direct. Lightning had struck a huge maple at the back of our sheep paddock about 200 feet from the house. I went out the next day with my mom to explore and still remember seeing the remnants of the exploded tree scattered across the entire paddock. The fragments were bone white, bleached by the sap having been boiled out the instant the lightning struck. And the burning smell inside? It was an electric shaver my grandmother had given my father the previous Christmas. It was charging above the bathroom sink, and of course there was no such thing as a GFCI outlet, at least nobody had them, back around 1972. Story 16. I was freshly married in my early 20s, living in Fallbrook, California. My husband, now ex, was a Marine and was at work while I was driving home from visiting family further south. In order to get into Fallbrook, you have to travel along a long, dark, and winding road called Mission Road. It was already a super dark night, around 11 p.m., and a little foggy as well. I was slowing down and coming around a slight bend in the road when all of a sudden the hair on my neck stood up, and I felt incredibly anxious. About 5 seconds later, a young woman jumped out of the brush directly ahead of me, maybe 50 feet away, on the left-hand side of the road, waving her arms in the air and gesturing frantically for me to pull over. I swerved a bit to the right, slowing down even further, but I did not stop. She looked young, maybe early 20s or even late teens, and a little dirty, and I was immediately conflicted over whether to continue driving. But something told me not to stop under any circumstances. I got further up the road, slowed a little more, and dialed 911 with one shaky hand. The dispatcher said she'd send someone to check, but encouraged me not to feel bad. Apparently, there had already been calls about this girl over the last hour, and police had been unable to locate her during follow-ups. I heard a few weeks later about some carjacking and robbery attempts in the area. I was very relieved I trusted my instincts that night. Story 17. I was at a family gathering, basically a reunion, but just for family within reasonable driving distance. Probably 30 people altogether. It was at a county park on a small lake with some grills and buildings. Just an empty hall with some picnic tables inside. You could rent for this kind of event. The sky started darkening as the storm approached, so all the coolers, chairs, balls, and kids' toys were brought into the building in anticipation of rain. The plan was to wait it out since afternoon showers are pretty common during the summer. But something in the air didn't feel or smell right, even though it looked like a typical summer storm. The hair on my neck stood up, and I was in full flight mode. I can't really describe it. The feeling in my stomach was just pure dread. I told my wife to take my daughter and get in the car. My brother-in-law took one look at my face and asked what was wrong. Apparently, I was white as a ghost. It wasn't even raining yet, and I was in a full-blown panic, yelling for everyone to leave, saying something wasn't right. No one else was that worried, mostly concerned with how I was acting. I went out to the car and was just about to turn the key when the tornado sirens went off. We weren't far from wherever those are located, or they were just stupidly loud, because it was absolutely deafening. Now the rest of the family was pouring out of the building to their cars, kids crying, and I looked across the lake, maybe a few miles in the distance, and saw a funnel cloud. We got out of there as fast as we could, as did everyone else. The building we had rented for the family barbecue was completely destroyed. Literally just a slab of concrete left and a huge amount of debris scattered all around. It had been hit dead on by an EF3. Story 18. I was a high school teenager around 13. I'm petite and looked way younger, so probably looked around 10 or 11. I was in my school uniform on my way to school when our local shopkeeper stopped me. He started talking as usual and asked what my plans were for the day. I looked down at my uniform and told him I was going to school. He asked if anything interesting was happening, and I replied, "As a matter of fact, we have a mini trip for my geography class." He then offered me a few snacks, which I declined. The reason I said no was because he was speaking to me from the back door of the shop and asked me to come to the back storeroom to collect the free snacks. I started feeling really strange, so I said I had to go and that I was getting late. He then asked me for my phone number, and I got completely freaked out and said I didn't have a phone before running off. I remember him shouting something at me, but I was too scared to listen. When I got back from school, I told my parents, and my father stormed to the shop to confront him. The man cowardly hid while the shop owner apologized. It made me wonder, if I had been a naive teenager and actually walked in for the free snacks, thinking he was being friendly, what would this grown man have done to me? Keep in mind, he looked like he was in his early 30s, and I was 13 in a school uniform, looking like a 10-year-old. I've had a few close calls as a young girl, but this one stood out the most. Story 19. I was an infantry platoon leader in Afghanistan. One night, we were on a foot patrol along the outskirts of a town where we were concerned about insurgent activity. I decided to move in closer to observe the area without worrying about the people of the town coming and going, which is always stressful. It was about 3 a.m., so everyone was asleep. It was completely silent. My interpreter carried an FM radio that he used to monitor non-secure traffic, which was how insurgents often communicated back then. We heard something in Pashto on his radio, and he very calmly turned to me and said, "Sir, they are saying the ambush is set." I immediately got on my radio and told my squad leaders to halt, and we pulled back and got out of there quickly. That was probably the most intense adrenaline rush I felt in combat. I'm convinced that interpreter saved several lives that night, and when he messaged me during the fall of Kabul asking if I could help get his family out, I contacted every person I could think of to make sure he got on a flight. He and his family now live in Seattle, where he works in IT. Story 20. About 3 weeks ago, I was blackwater diving off the coast of Boynton Beach, Florida. For those who don't know, blackwater diving involves being dropped with a light buoy to drift over hundreds of feet of water in the Gulf Stream at night. The light attracts all sorts of deep-sea creatures that rise up to feed, making it a popular activity for underwater photographers. As a precaution, all divers must wear at least one light on their tank to be visible. I had accidentally grabbed my blue blinking light. Before I jumped in, the captain mentioned that blue blinking lights were commonly used by fishermen to attract large predators at night. As a regular shark diver, there's not much that scares me down there. But something about that gave me chills. I decided to switch my light for a regular green glow stick. That very same night, a well-known blackwater diver from another boat a few miles north was impaled in the leg by a massive swordfish. The fish tore the sword out of his leg and kept hitting him with it, similar to how they hunt large squid in deep waters. He suffered serious leg injuries and had to self-rescue from nearly 100 feet below. No idea if he'll ever walk again, let alone dive. That close call really stuck with me. Story 21. About a year and a half ago, I got out of a concert hall with my friend with benefits, her friend and her friend's boyfriend. We walked across a busy street to a bar around 2:30 a.m., got a quick tequila shot and a drink to end the night. Then we left to wait for our Uber. We were sitting on the curb by the road when a group of people walked over to our side. They looked like trouble, just had that energy, like they were looking to cause problems. I looked at my FWB and pulled her up. She gave me a confused look at first, then saw the "we need to leave now" look in my eyes. She turned around and told the others, "We're going." Not 5 seconds later, bang, 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 bang. I felt what seemed like a painful splinter in the back of my leg, but we ran straight to a nearby police car for cover. Turns out a bullet hit the exact spot on the curb where we had been sitting, and a fragment lodged in my calf. It wasn't even aimed at us, just a wild shot. Tragically, someone lost their life that night. My gut instinct might have saved one of us from becoming collateral damage. The only reason I realized there was stone embedded in my leg and not just a pulled muscle was because an officer noticed blood running down and thought I'd been shot. A quick statement and ER visit to get a marble-sized shard of concrete removed, while absolutely exhausted and still buzzing from the night, and I was on my way home by 6 a.m. I didn't fully process what happened until I got home and thought, holy crap, I can't believe I'm alive right now. Story 22. I'm a teenage girl who worked at a restaurant pizza shop. I was harassed by these two men one weekend who were totally intoxicated, so they were kicked out. The following weekend, they returned and tried to sit next to me at the counter connected to the bar, but they couldn't, so they chose a table across from me and moved both their seats to stare directly at me. They would only order from my counter instead of our waitresses, stared at me constantly, made jokes about harming a girl, and just generally freaked me out. I ended up going to our upstairs employees-only section to fold boxes. I was up there alone, down a hallway where nobody would hear me. I started feeling sick to my stomach as I heard someone walking up the stairs and whispering. I closed the door, turned off my music, and texted my mom. The two men had followed me up there, then tried to go down the unlocked hallway. But another waitress noticed them bothering me and caught them trying to come after me. I just had this gut feeling when I heard them coming. She came down the hallway and told me to be quiet and hold our body weight against the door. We waited for them to leave while they stood there, waiting for me to come out before making some disturbing remarks and going back downstairs. My dad came and picked me up early because I just felt so off. The following day, I had to come in for another shift, and as I was clocking out, the TV started playing a true crime documentary about a girl with the same name as me who had been kidnapped and assaulted by two men. My stomach dropped, and I gave my notice shortly after that. I realized I wasn't going to be protected there and wouldn't be surprised if those men returned again. Story 23. I was camping in eastern Arizona with a friend of mine. We like to hike in this particular area that's fairly isolated. We found a spot probably 14 or 15 miles deep into the forest along small quad and bike trails and set up camp for the night. We put out our fire and went into our tents. Probably about 15 minutes later, I was reading a book on my phone when I heard what I can only describe as a roar, and it sounded like it was about 50 feet away from our campsite. Never in my life have I been so terrified. I got immediate goosebumps and went into full panic mode. My friend and I both got out of our tents, looked around, but couldn't see anything because it was pitch dark, and ran straight to the car. We immediately drove off and found a motel about an hour away. I'll never forget that sound. I've seen bears in real life and listened to what a bear roar sounds like, and it was nothing like that. The one we heard was almost high-pitched and filled me with instant dread. No clue to this day what it was, but I'm glad we got out of there. We came back the next day, and everything was as we had left it, except the coals in the fire were scattered around a bit. There had been no wind that night, so I don't know what caused it. I haven't gone back to that area since, and I have no desire to. Whatever made that sound definitely didn't want us there. Story 24. I was supposed to get off my retail job at 10 p.m. and catch the first bus I needed to get home. My manager had me stay later, so I had to catch a later bus and change my route since my usual second bus stopped running. I noticed this late bus ride was empty, unlike the 10 p.m. one that was usually full. The stop wasn't my usual, so I just sat and waited. I was texting my best friend, asking her to pick me up since sometimes buses don't show or are late. She wasn't answering because she ended up working late too. Then I started noticing my surroundings. I was just off a main street, south of several closed corner stores. I realized this bus bench was right by a park that closes at sundown. There were no cars and no people. The street light near the bus stop was out. I immediately felt unnerved and trapped. Nothing was open, and nothing was nearby. A man was walking toward the bench I was sitting on. He was coming from the park. He would pass under a street light and be illuminated, then disappear into the darkness before coming back into the light again. My heart was pounding. He came up behind the bench but didn't sit. He just stood behind me, slightly to my right. Then he started walking around the bench, circling me. I called my friend and pretended she had answered. I left a voicemail. "Hey, you almost here?" "Yep, I'm still here. I'll hop in as soon as you pull up. Want to grab food?" "Nah, we had fast food last week." The man kept circling me. I was too scared to look at his face. I hung up and put my phone away, then realized I had my box cutter in my bag. I pulled it out and started playing with it, pushing the blade in and out. He stopped circling me. I finally looked at him and stood up. He turned and walked away. My friend pulled up soon after. We drove past the man who was still walking aimlessly. I bought a car about a week later. From that point on, I always gave my coworkers a ride home if we worked late together and needed one. Story 25. My wife and I used to live in a rural exurb outside a large metropolitan area. We were on the interstate, about halfway between the city and our home, when my wife, who was 6 months pregnant, started having contractions. At the next off-ramp, I turned around and headed back toward the city, planning to go to the ER. I took the very first exit on the outskirts of the city. It was pretty desolate. The only thing on that 2-lane road were a couple of rock quarries, which were empty after dark. There wasn't much light on that winter-darkened evening. I pulled into a gravel turnout just south of the off-ramp, came to a stop, leaving the engine running, and turned my full attention to my wife. A few minutes passed before my attention was pulled away by a car parked across the turnout, suddenly turning on their headlights with high beams. My wife grabbed my arm and said, "We've got to get out of here." And I was like, "Yeah." So I dropped it in gear and took off down the 2-lane road toward the city. The other car gave chase for a while, but I floored it. I drove a Dodge Stratus. Eventually, we got into civilization, and the other car turned around and left. We spent the night in the hospital, narrowly avoiding the premature birth of my son. He's 17 now. We guessed that I hadn't noticed my headlights were shining on some kind of suspicious activity, possibly a drug handoff, because I was focused on my wife, and it angered whoever was there. But who knows? You never really know, and danger can be anywhere. Story 26. When I was looking for a new place to rent a few years back, I found a spot not far from the house I was moving out of. To my surprise, when the front door opened, it was someone I recognized from school. They were a few years younger than me, which mildly bothered me, but not enough to walk away. The strange part was that they didn't remember me at all. As we were talking, I started to feel this creeping sense of danger. I couldn't explain it. Everything the guy was saying sounded reasonable, and the price for the room was about average for the time. But something about him was very unsettling. He was extremely thin, and normally I wouldn't feel threatened by someone with his build. But something about him was setting off alarm bells in my head. It peaked when I was being shown the room and had my back to him. I could almost feel his eyes boring into the back of my head. I kept a polite facade but left shortly after, claiming I had a few more places to look at that day. About 18 months later, I was driving past that same house and saw police tape all over it. I tried to find out what had happened online but couldn't find anything. To this day, I hesitate to call out to people I remember from back then. That memory serves as a reminder that many years have passed, and I have no idea what some of them are like now. Story 27. My ex had been planning to have me harmed and make it look like a home invasion. His behavior had shifted in a very strange way the week before. I found out later that he had gotten another woman pregnant behind my back and had planned to move her in and have my kids taken into state custody. Their father had already passed away. He wanted to collect my life insurance. That morning, I got up right after he left for work, got dressed in the first clothes I could grab, woke up my kids and told them we had to leave. I told them not to ask questions, just that we needed to go. The door that led from our garage into the house was always religiously kept locked. That night, it had been left unlocked. In the weeks leading up to this, Our security alarm had been bypassed, and he tried to blame my oldest son, even though my son didn't even know how to do that kind of thing. My ex had taught someone else how to disable it. Story 28. I was riding my horse in our outdoor arena, along with a friend on our horse. Suddenly, both of our horses froze and looked out toward one of the hayfields, which is surrounded by a forest preserve. We could see a huge animal walking casually toward a small group of trees in the middle of the field. I have 7 German shepherds, so at first I thought it might be one of my dogs. But it wasn't walking like a dog. Plus, our horses are used to dogs. They wouldn't be this afraid. I pulled my phone out and zoomed in on the animal. It was a mountain lion in Wisconsin. Our horses were just frozen, staring at it, but they were also trembling. I've never seen my horse so scared. I didn't really know what to do, because I thought if we rode back to the barn, the mountain lion might chase us. The barn was behind us, but our horses wouldn't turn their backs to it. So we backed our horses up until they were willing to turn around, then rode the horses straight into the barn and shut the doors. We called the Department of Natural Resources, sent them the video, and they came out and were actually able to tranquilize the mountain lion and relocate her. Apparently, that specific mountain lion was already known for being too comfortable around humans, and she liked to roam. I'm very grateful she didn't harm any of our animals, but it was an experience that scared me in a way I've never felt before. Story 29. I was at a party at my then best friend's house. She lived with her brother and another close friend of theirs. They invited a good number of people, around 50, but they were all people that we knew. It was a lot of fun. People were outside playing games or inside mingling, making food, etc. A few hours later, I came into the house after playing a few rounds of beer pong and cornhole outside. At a quick glance, I remember thinking, wow, it's packed in here. Then I realized, I don't recognize anyone in this house anymore. I walked around the house a little more, trying to find anyone I knew, and came up completely empty. I had an awful feeling that if I stayed, something bad was going to happen. I managed to find my best friend, told her I was heading home, gave her a hug, grabbed my keys from her bedroom, and walked to my car. 5 minutes into driving home, my phone started blowing up. I stupidly assumed I was being asked to make a beer run for everyone, so I ignored it, made it home, and went to bed. The next morning, my phone rang again, and I picked up this time. Turns out, right after I left, a huge group of people no one recognized had shown up and started breaking windows and throwing bottles. My best friend, her boyfriend, her brother, a 6'7", 350-pound guy, and their roommate tried to calm everyone down and ask the strangers to leave. They weren't having it. Among the group of strangers was a group of girls, I'm assuming girlfriends or acquaintances, who grabbed my best friend by the hair, dragged her into the front yard, and attacked her. Her boyfriend tried to run out to help, but the men grabbed him and tried to beat him up too. Her brother grabbed 2 of the attackers off her boyfriend and threw them into some rocks. Then 2 of the strangers pulled out weapons and began firing. 1 round hit her boyfriend in the head, thankfully just grazing the side. Another hit a neighboring home, and another bounced off something and hit one of the girls who was attacking my friend. Everyone inside the house ran. Then the strangers fled too, leaving my friends in the yard. My best friend had many bruises, a bald patch from her hair being pulled out, and bruised ribs. Her boyfriend was treated for the graze wound, and her brother had some scratches. Their roommate had bruises from people trying to escape in the chaos. To this day, 8 years later, we still don't know who those people were. No one ever came forward, and the police didn't have enough evidence to make any arrests. Story 30. I was a dirty punk rock kid who listened to punk rock. I went to a show in NYC in Tompkins Square Park when I was about 17 or 18. My friends and I were talking to this Eastern European punk we met. I'll call him Ivan, because I don't remember his name, but it was something along those lines. Ivan was tall, lanky, and seemed soft, like someone who was in over his head. He said he was really excited to be at an American punk rock show. He seemed innocent and too kind, trusting and friendly for a rough show like this. My friends pointed out a white supremacist skinhead and said to be careful, that the guy was dangerous. Think, a big guy covered in tattoos. Ivan overheard and said, "We don't like people like that in my country." We said we didn't either. We just wanted to stay aware of where he was and keep our distance. The band started playing, and I kept an eye on the guy. The show ended. It had been a good time overall. And as the crowd cleared out, we saw Ivan approaching the guy. That's when I got the feeling. I said, "We gotta go." But everyone else froze and didn't move. I was wrong about Ivan. He walked right up to that guy, said something, got a response, and then immediately started fighting. He brought the guy to the ground and kept going. Then he picked up a city trash can and slammed it down on him repeatedly. Passers-by said they were calling the police, and I said, "I don't think they'll be here quick enough." I physically grabbed my friends and didn't stop until we were on the train. It was a terrifying experience. Everyone else froze. I saw just how wrong I was about who the most dangerous person in that crowd actually was. I have no idea what happened to Ivan, but I'm pretty sure I know what happened to the man he confronted. Story 31. We were driving back from an impromptu family vacation. My husband and I were both driving cars. Too many people, not enough alert drivers, and I was following him. We were in the left lane passing a truck when I suddenly had an overwhelming feeling that we needed to slow way down and move over immediately. I called him and told him we needed to get over, go slower than the truck, and turn our hazard lights on. He thought I was being a little paranoid, but he's learned to trust my gut feelings, so he did it. Suddenly, we ran into a freak ice storm. The truck slid off the road, the car that had passed us on the left slid into oncoming traffic, and 3 other cars behind us proceeded to slide off the road. There was a big dip on the side of the road, and one of the cars even tipped over. We somehow came through it all unscathed and made it home safely. Another time, I was driving to work and was behind a work van with ladders on top. It wasn't particularly busy on the highway, but someone was driving fairly close behind me. I got a horrible feeling that I needed to move over right away. I changed lanes about 15 seconds before one of the ladders flew off the van. It hit the road right next to me, and the car that was behind me ran over it slightly, but luckily wasn't seriously damaged. I've had this feeling several times in my life and have even canceled entire vacations because of it. I don't know if anything would have happened on those other occasions, but I truly believe I've avoided some serious trouble thanks to it. Story 32. I was walking in Miami during the daytime with 2 friends. I was 19 at the time. It's important to note that both of them are small in stature. We were stopped by a guy who tried to ask me out for a drink. Fine, it happens. I declined, but he became very insistent. He had a strange, intense look in his eyes, and when he shook all of our hands, his grip was uncomfortably strong. The whole interaction felt off. It wasn't just regular catcalling. He stared at all of us and said, "All of you look interesting, especially her," while pointing at me. We were finally able to walk away and kept moving, but something about it made all the hairs on our necks stand up. A couple of hours later, we had decided to stick to a more crowded area. We came back to my car, and there was another man circling it with a cigarette in his mouth, checking out the tires. We waited from a distance until he walked away, then rushed into the car and left. We had originally planned to go to the beach that day, but after everything, the mall felt like a safer option. About a week later, I saw a post warning that Miami had seen a recent influx in human trafficking activity, and people were being told to stay alert. Turns out we were unknowingly in the middle of one of the districts affected that day. Story 33. In 2012, I drove across the country from Philly to LA with a good friend of mine. I'm a big guy and she's a smaller woman. Just for context, we camped the whole way out. The plan was to get to LA, drop her off at her new apartment, and then I'd fly home. She couldn't move in until Wednesday morning, and we arrived outside of LA on Tuesday evening. We didn't have money for hotels, so we decided to camp in Angeles National Forest. I don't know why, but I had a weird feeling about camping that close to a major city. The vibe felt off, but we got there, set up before dark, and ate dinner. My friend asked, "If you could see any animal tonight, what would you want to see?" And I swear I said, "Not a person." When we arrived, there was only one other campsite in the area, around the bend from us. We saw the guy camping there. Anyway, we went to sleep. At some point in the night, I woke up. There was a flashlight shining around our tent. I figured another camper had arrived after we fell asleep. Then I heard a man's voice clear as day, right outside the tent. "Who's in there? Who's in that tent?" My friend woke up too and said, "Hello?" So I knew I wasn't imagining it. We both called out, asking who it was, but got no answer. We didn't hear footsteps walking away or see the flashlight again. I started panicking. Why would someone come up to our tent in the middle of the night? I grabbed my headlamp and my knife, unzipped the tent, and jumped out quickly, in case someone was waiting. But no one was there. I looked everywhere, nothing. No other campsites in sight. My friend said we should try to go back to sleep, but I was too freaked out. It was 4 a.m. and raining. I told her we needed to leave right then. She said I was scaring her, and I said, good. We threw everything in the car, all wet and crumpled, and got out of there. On the road out of the campsite, we saw what I assumed was the guy. He wasn't the same man from the other campsite, just some random person walking back toward our site. I cracked the window as we passed and said, dude, what the heck? All he said was, sorry for freaking you guys out, and kept walking back in the direction we had just left. We booked it to Santa Monica because we had no idea what else to do. I still have no clue why he did that, but it scared me more than anything. I haven't camped in Angeles since, though I'm actually going again this summer. Story 34. I woke up on a day I had planned to go out with some friends to a party, sheer event for some daytime drinks with a truly horrible feeling in my stomach. I couldn't shake it, and I even told my dad about it before I left. I had been looking forward to the event for weeks, even bought a whole new outfit, including shoes. But suddenly I was hearing this voice in my head telling me not to go. I almost hoped something would happen on the way there, just to give me a reason to turn back. But there was no rational explanation for my fear. It was my day off, I was going to see good friends, and everything should have felt perfect. So I brushed it off as some kind of strange anxiety overlap and made a mental note to talk to my doctor if it ever happened again. Once I arrived and started drinking, the feeling went away, but so did my memory of the entire day. The next thing I remember is coming to about 12 hours later and realizing I had been drugged and assaulted. Story 35. When I was about 16, my best friend and I used to hang out at a coffee shop before we went to a class we were taking together at a local college. There was a guy in our class, around 17 or 18. We'd make small talk, but something about him made my bones feel cold. My friend kept saying we should invite him to the coffee shop with us, but I kept making excuses. Eventually, she invited him to meet up with us and a few other friends, but I couldn't shake the sense of danger I felt around him. The guys in our group all said he gave off creepy vibes, but most of the girls thought he was cute, so they didn't agree. I started getting up and leaving whenever I saw him after that. About a month later, he walked into the coffee shop with this intense, fixed grin on his face. He looked absolutely terrifying and kept letting out small laughs. He came up to our group and said he was paying for everyone's food and drinks because today is a magical day. I was really unsettled, so I made an excuse, left, and went home. The next day, his photo was in the newspaper. It was a selfie. Him grinning and pointing at the police station behind him. Right after he had lunch and a drink with my friend group, he walked over to the police station and turned himself in. That morning, he had taken the lives of both his parents. Story 36. I was 22, had just split from the father of my kids, and had spent the day visiting family. When the kids and I got home, the house was dark. I parked the car in the garage and left my two youngest in their car seats while I quickly ran inside to use the bathroom. I sent my oldest upstairs. The living room, kitchen, and bedrooms were all on the second floor of this old beach house, to turn on the lights and get into pajamas. As I walked through the hall downstairs, rushing to the bathroom, I sat in the dark and suddenly smelled cigarettes. All the windows were shut. I looked around, trying to figure out where the smell was coming from. I peeked around the corner and saw that the door to the yard was open, and there was a burning cigarette on the floor. That's when I knew someone was in my house. I didn't know where exactly, and I had just sent my kid upstairs into the dark alone. I ran like lightning to the stairs and shouted, "Get down here now!" The silence that followed made my blood run cold. I didn't know whether to run upstairs or back to the car to protect the other kids. After a moment, my oldest came racing downstairs and we all got into the car and locked the doors. I called the police, and within minutes, 7 police cars showed up, armed with riot gear. It turned out my ex had broken in while we were gone and left the door open. A homeless person had entered afterward. The house was completely trashed, everything damaged. My son had taken a while to come downstairs because he saw the mess and didn't know what had happened. We moved out the next day. Story 37. I've had a few experiences over the years. One that stands out was when I was in the woods with my 1-year-old, picking up pine cones. It was about 4 p.m. on a summer day, still light and warm. Suddenly, this overwhelming feeling of dread, fear, and being watched came over me. I scooped him up and ran. The next day, a local mother posted in our community Facebook group that she and her 2 young daughters had been aggressively approached by someone in the woods. That encounter haunted me. Another time, I was heavily pregnant and had attended a hen party just for the dinner portion before planning to head home. I was about to call a taxi when the bride insisted that the limo she'd rented should drop me off. I thought it would be a fun surprise for my husband to see me come home in a limo, so I agreed. The driver seemed fine, chatty and polite, but as we were heading home, he started detouring toward the docks, eventually pulling into a very sketchy-looking parking area. He didn't say a word. I immediately called my husband and very loudly told him where I was and that I'd be home in 10 minutes. The driver then made some excuse about needing to pick something up from a friend, disappeared for 5 minutes, and then drove me home. I'm convinced he had bad intentions. To this day, the regret, fear, and feeling of being completely vulnerable still linger. Ladies, we are never fully safe. Never assume you are. Story 38. My husband, child, and I live out in the middle of nowhere on a plot of land that's about 100 acres. I'd say probably 95 of those acres are wilderness, with ATV and hiking trails that we, and several previous owners, created by exploring. We use that land for camping, hiking, and hunting. We like to find a spot, clear it a bit, and camp overnight. There's so much space that we've never stayed in the same place twice. We've seen some kill sites, both old and fresh, lots of animal tracks, places where deer bed down, etc. I've even spent a lot of time hiking solo while the kid is at school and my husband is at work. Whether alone or with the family, we always carry a firearm for protection. A few weeks ago, we decided to load up our camping gear and start a new trail. We mark the trails we create with spray paint on trees. We were pretty far into the woods, having hiked for almost an hour, when the atmosphere suddenly changed. I'm not sure who noticed it first, but my husband, who was leading the 3 of us, turned around and gave me a concerned look. The birds had stopped chirping, the insects were quiet. There were no sounds around us. In the woods, complete silence is rarely a good sign. We continued on, hyper-aware of our surroundings, while our kid happily kept talking. We came to a stream that marks the midway point of our property. We stopped for a few minutes, my husband and I locked in a silent stare. We both felt something was wrong, but didn't want to scare our daughter. I finally broke the silence and said I suddenly didn't feel well and that we should head home. My husband nodded in agreement while our daughter protested. "Too bad, kiddo." We turned around and started back. After going a few hundred yards, still in that eerie silence, I looked to my right and saw someone crouched down in a ghillie suit about 150 feet off our trail. I'm positive they saw that I noticed them, but they never moved. I cleared my throat to get my husband's attention, and when he looked back, I placed my hand on the gun in the holster on my hip. That prompted him to adjust his rifle. I sped up and we hurried back home. I told my husband everything once we were inside. We called the police to report the trespasser. A report was filed, and we were told to call again if we saw anything else. A few days later, my husband and I went out alone and set up a bunch of deer cams. We stayed away from the woods for about a week. Then we went back out to retrieve the footage. Out of the 9 cams we placed, we captured a person in a ghillie suit in 2 images. We handed copies over to the police to add to our report. We haven't gone back out since, except to check the deer cams. Nothing else has shown up. But what unsettles me even more is thinking back to the times when we were camping and heard movement near our tent at night. We always assumed it was curious animals. Now, I'm not so sure. Story 39. When I was in 4th or 5th grade, I was with a couple of my close friends. One of them lived near a cemetery, about a 5-minute walk from her house. It was a big cemetery and we liked walking around in it. Behind the cemetery was a shortcut through the woods that led to a large park, which coincidentally was right next to our school. The 3 of us were just walking around the cemetery when all of a sudden, a blue truck pulled up next to us on the road that ran through the area, probably only 10 feet away. I could see 2 men inside and they were just staring at us. I instantly got this gut feeling that something was very wrong and told my friends, "We need to go now." It's a little hard to explain, But right before the shortcut into the woods is a fence with a cutout that leads into a field of grass and a hill. That hill leads into the neighborhood where my other friend lived.